Hello everyone, my name is Marcos Machado. I'm the bass professor at the University of Southern Mississippi. I'm very happy to be here. This is an exciting event. It's a first for ICB history, but I think it's very important that we keep the ball rolling during these tough times. So I'm here to share a little bit about my approach to technique on the double bass. Some of you know me from the book Tao of Bass. It's a 4-volume series of books dealing with technique. And also I have a course on Discover Double Bass called Integral Technique. So what is this about? First, I really love bass history, bass schools, methods like Simandl, Billet, Caymmi, Mengoli, Nani, Hertel, Montag, all those. I'm a big fan of those guys. They did so much for the double bass. So this is something that we really need to respect and love. And what I do, it's I add kind of new layers of knowledge on top of this, or I mix schools. I'm very comfortable with the different schools of bass playing. I started playing Italian school where you play third finger, right? And then I switched to a German school where I use first and second fingers for half steps. And then I met Francois in the 90s. And I started doing lots of pivots, but then since I had some background on Italian school, my third finger was very strong, so I implement the pivot concept to my third finger, and that's something that I use a lot. And then new techniques like low crabs, and we're going to be talking about all these things. But most importantly is the basics, because everything it's built on top of some solid foundation. So I'm going to talk about some important concepts, basic left-hand concepts today. Unfortunately, there's no time to go over the bow that I consider the most important aspect of bass playing, but we're going to try to cover as much as we can about the left hand. So let's get started with some basics. Let's start with hand positions. So usually we have two main positions that we use to play the bass. We have a more square hand, and that you see a lot in the Simandl book. You can even see the picture of Simandl himself with that kind of shape. There is also Zimmerman playing with that kind of shape. And then you have another shape that's a little bit more cellistic, where the nail it's more inclinated towards the bridge. That's a slanted hand position or an inclinated hand position, and both are very important. That's the misconception that people do, you know, that you should use this or you should use that, and it's A or B. And I think it's more like a Taoistic view of the opposites. They coexist. Okay, there's no black without white, there's no hot without cold. So to me, those shapes of the hand, they coexist. Depending on what I'm gonna use, what I'm gonna play, I'm gonna inclinate my hand, or I'm gonna play a little bit more squared. Now, the advantages of each we should discuss now. Now, if you consider the square hand, it's a perfect shaped hand to play the intervals of fourths, because except for those who are dealing with fifths now, the tuning fifths, that I love it too. It's great, adds so much for the bass. But for the people who tune the bass in fourths still, the square hand is very useful, because when you're playing fourths particularly, it's very important, right? So it's very symmetric, very organized. So This is one of the advantages for this square hand, and also the square hand is a little bit more compact usually. Okay, you can have the hand a little bit more compact, and it's very easy also to organize the positions, right? You can see pretty much each position when the hand is a little bit more square. Now, if you compare to a slanted hand when it's a little bit more inclinated, I think the very first thing that happens is that the slanted hand unlocks the hand. When you have a more square hand, you see if you try to open, the fourth finger is kind of stuck there. You limit your range for those 3 half steps. Now, if you slightly inclinate your hand, immediately you have this kind of motion, this range. So you can play a minor third very easily with any finger, 1, 4, 1, 3. Okay, so I think that opens up a little bit your hand, and also I think another plus of using a slanted hand is if you compare when the hand is square, okay, and then you take a finger and try to vibrate. Vibrato is nice, it's focused, but it's more narrow. Now, if you have the hand a little bit more inclinated, you're gonna have a broader vibrato compared to. So those are things for you to consider, and again, they coexist. You're gonna see me playing with both techniques. And I hope you use both for your advantage too. Let's talk about finger pressure. Basically, the left hand operates using this system of counter pressure, where you're pressuring the thumb against the other fingers. Usually, we use more pressure than we actually need. This is a very common mistake we do, cellists and violin players. So perhaps a good exercise for you to manage this a little bit better and be more aware of the amount of pressure you need is to play a couple notes. It's very simple passage like play that. But when you do that, you're gonna remove the left hand from the fingerboard. By doing so, you don't have this counter motion, this counter pressure happening, and you're going to have to rely a little bit more on the arm weight to pull the string down. So rather than squeezing and pressing the thumb against the other fingers, you're going to allow your arm weight to pull down the string like so. Try that exercise, and that's probably going to help you to be a little bit more aware of this kind of pressure. Let's do a couple more exercises to help improving that. Here is another exercise to help you being aware of thumb pressure. So it's a little bit more complex pattern, but still fairly easy, so you can really focus on relaxation of the thumb. And you can experiment with this exercise both horizontally, moving across the 4 strings, and vertically shifting. And both variations, you're gonna avoid touching the fingerboard with the thumb, like so. Then you can move vertically. So slow is this. Look at the thumb. Try those exercises, and I think they are going to help you a lot. Another one that you could do perhaps is the famous Petrarchy. I forgot the name, it's so many years I did that. I think it's number 7. But you know, the famous exercise, excellent exercise that he used fifths. So that's a good exercise for you to do again, not touching the fingerboard. So slowly that is. Okay, and when you do that, you're gonna see that you're gonna have to really rely on arm weight, and also the pressure point is gonna be more inclinated towards the first finger. The first exercise, the exercise that was in only one string, you could feel the balance, the pressure point on the second finger. With the Petrarchy, you're gonna feel that on the first finger. Let me add one exercise. This is from my book, Tao, where you're gonna change the pressure point. You're gonna change from 1 to 4. You're gonna feel the first half of the exercise more weight on the first finger. Second half of the exercise, you transfer that weight to the fourth fingers, the principle of the torque. Okay, so is this exercise here. And you can move that also chromatically across the 4 strings. And remember, when you do this exercise, the thumb, it's not touching the fingerboard. Then you allow the thumb to relax and very lightly touch the fingerboard, and adding a little bit of counter pressure, but much less than we usually do. Okay, so those are the tips for finger pressure, particularly with the thumb. Let's talk a little bit about finger pressure from the upper part of the hand with the other fingers. So you can also check the pressure, this counter pressure, if it's too much, by just sliding the top fingers, like 1, 2, and 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, depending of your technique. But let's try 1, 2, 4 now. Then you're just going to slide half step slowly up and down, because by doing so, the hand needs to be very relaxed and not with too much pressure. So it's this. Then you switch for second finger, do the same. And fourth finger. Just by doing this very simple exercise, you're going to be aware of the amount of pressure that you actually need to press the string. Plus, there's a benefit from this. This is kind of, I call this the violin shift, so the wrist shift, and that's a technique that might come in hand for your shifting technique, when you can combine a big shift and finish with a violin shift. This is very useful for the solo repertoire. Okay, so One more thing, I'm gonna give you one more cool exercise that I call the windshield exercise. And for that I will need to move my iPhone to a different spot so you can see what I'm doing behind the neck when I'm playing those notes. So here is the windshield exercise frontal view. And you can actually see my thumb crawling up, up, down, up. This is very useful because when you start dealing with more advanced concepts, four-finger technique, pivot, large pivots, the tongue moves quite a bit. He changes places, and many times he changes places within a passage. You don't have time to shift, or you have to, the thumb has to anticipate the next movement. So work on those, and I think you're gonna have a much more flexible thumb, a much more relaxed hand, and that's gonna allow you to play very easily, especially when dealing with shifts too. Another good way for you to work on this pressure awareness is to play natural harmonics and alternate them with pressed notes. So that relation of the amount of little pressure that you need to make a harmonic speak and the amount of pressure that you need to make an actual note to sound, it's very important for you to be aware. And usually people realize that it's much closer than they imagine. It's not big difference between a harmonic and a pressed note. For harmonics, regardless, you should use a little bit of pressure so they speak very clearly. So let's do that on a D. Alternate fingers. And change string. Can change positions also. And then let's talk a little bit about finger motion, and this is a very important topic. Most of the time you're going to use what I call a bass joint movement, and that's a movement where you use the whole finger. The movement starts from this knuckle here. It's not this kind of motion from the upper joints, but the whole bass joint. So a very good exercise would be something on the first positions where you're just alternating an open string and a note, and you're actually using the whole bass joint to articulate that note, something like this. Now, there are two things that you have to consider here. When you go to a new finger, you can use only that finger, this kind of movement, or you can help that with the lower finger. So when you go to the second finger, you can drop the first finger together. Not. So both are correct, both ways are correct. Of course, this is a little bit stronger, you're gonna probably last longer doing that, especially the fourth finger. Okay, so it's a thing for you to consider. Now, that motion usually is the motion you're gonna use even for trios. If you have a very elegant trio. But now, if you have a very loud and long trio, then it's when you can use this kind of wrist kind of motion. And remember, they both coexist, but of course the wrist motion is a little bit more wobbly, is a little bit more because of the way the hand is moving. So the bass joint is more clean, and the wrist movement is stronger, is louder, and you probably will last longer also using the wrist. So think about those two ways of approaching things: a finger-based movement and a more wrist-based movement. And again, I could not stress this enough, they coexist. You should be using everything. Before we move to more advanced concepts, I would like to talk a little bit about the bow. Let's bring the attention to the bow for a minute. During all these basic exercises that we've discussed so far, be very attentive to the bow, okay? Be attentive of the bow and the sound point, where you're playing with the bow, the speed, the pressure, bow planes, when you change strings, all the basic concepts that you know about the bow. Don't allow things that are happening here to disrupt the bow. The bow should move very smooth, very connected. So I want to share with you a very cool exercise to help you achieving that independence between the bow and the left hand. The exercise consists of a very easy pattern on the left hand: G sharp, A, B flat, A, and you're gonna loop that. You're gonna play that. Then you're gonna add an acceleration rhythm to it. You're gonna start with quarter notes. You're gonna change to 8 notes, triplets, 16, sextuplets, and 32nd notes. So it's gonna be something like this. But then the fun. Now let's have some fun with this exercise. In order to work this very smooth bow, each 2 beats you're changing bow very smoothly, I want you to split this in two. I want you to play the bow pattern on the D string. So you're gonna play. You're going to play left hand pizzicato. Then you're going to do the acceleration, 8 notes. Triplets. Sextuplets. And 32nd. Okay, but then the fun is to put both together. So let's try that. This is a very nice exercise for you to have very clean independence between the hands. Okay, so try that. and I hope this helps with your articulation. So let's move to pivots now. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about pivot, and my approach to the pivot technique is the same approach I have for general bass playing. I use everything. I use a pivot 1 2 4, 1 3 4, 2 3, everything that I can possibly do to play clean, to play with the articulation of a cello or a violin, because essentially that's, I think, is the main value of pivot. It allows you to play same articulation as cellos and violins in the orchestra, so you can match that kind of articulation, that kind of grouping. I would have to spend a few hours showing examples from the repertoire and how you can match any passage with this pivot approach. The main thing about pivot that I want to discuss are the three basic elements of this movement. The very first one is the famous one. We all know that. We all heard many people talk about this. Is the rotation of the hand around the thumb, right? The thumb stays in place, and then you move the hand around the thumb. Okay, this is very important. This is the very first thing. Now the second thing is as important as this, is the release of the finger preceding the pivot. Now let's say if you have to play B flat C and you want to pivot that. Now before I play that C, I release the note preceding the pivot, and that's the B flat. Release and play the C. Now if I'm playing A natural, B flat, C, same applies. I'm gonna release the first finger going to a B flat, release the second finger going to C natural. Okay, this is very important that you have this concept of release. And the same thing goes if you're using third finger. Let's say if you're playing E, F sharp, G, it's the same. Going to F sharp, you release the E with the first finger, you're already on the F sharp position, and then you release F sharp to play the fourth finger on G. Okay, this is crucial. It's crucial. Otherwise, you think you're doing pivot, but you're kind of doing an extension or a semi-extension, and that leads me to the third aspect of this technique, and this is when at any moment of a pivot, my hand is always relaxed and in a traditional position. So let's go back to the first example with the A, B flat, C. Now if you look at my hand, of course, when I start, it's very relaxed and I'm in a traditional position. Now when I release the first finger to second finger, I'm still on that position, but with the weight of the hand more centered in the middle. When I start, the weight was more around this muscle here, and when I move to the second finger, the weight is here, of course, right? It's the principle of the torque. You're transferring the weight, correct? Now, now it's the most important thing. When I go to the fourth finger on C, look where my first finger is. My first finger is under a B flat. So now if I go back to B flat with second finger, I have to release the fourth finger. Release, 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 release. This is an actual pivot where my hand is always relaxed. I'm transferring the weight from finger to finger by releasing the finger preceding the pivot, and finally my hand is always in a relaxed position. And that goes to big pivots. Let's say if you're doing like a major third pivot, like playing E, F sharp, G. When I play the F sharp, look what happens. My first finger is in F natural, my fourth finger is in G natural. Now, my second finger is on G, my first finger is on F sharp. I'm always on a traditional position, even though I'm executing a big pivot, a major third pivot. So this is crucial. So let's put everything together. So the pivot movement is a rotation around the thumb. So the thumb stays and you rotate. And of course, you know the principle. The bigger the pivot, the higher the thumb needs to go, right? If you want to go play a very large pivot, you have to bring the thumb higher. And then you can move much, much further. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, release. You have to release and transfer the weight to the new finger. And finally, the hand positioning. During all moments on a pivot, the hand is always relaxed. And that's why you can play pivot like Francois Rabat. Until you're 90 years old, he's going to be 100 years old and he's going to be playing pivots. Because it's never putting too much stress on the hand. Extensions, they put lots of stress on the hand. They are very useful too. I'm not saying that never use. Remember, everything coexists. Sometimes I'm going to use extensions, especially if I'm doing double stops, or if I'm doing a passage who has a pedal note or something. So never say never. Everything is there at your disposal. You just need to be aware and see what is more healthy approach for your bass playing. So this is it. This is it for pivot. And let's move to thumb position now. My thumb position approach is pretty standard. Perhaps the only addition I did for that is the addition of many positions. I have 18 or 19 positions on thumb position. We are very familiar to the Petracchi or the Montag and many others who organize thumb position in 3 or 4, or Striker. They all organize the thumb position mainly in chromatic position, semi-chromatic, diatonic, and augmented. Correct? What I did, I went further and I had all the positions, including some pentatonic positions, because those were things that I found in the repertoire. Even if you think about something like the Bottesini concerto has this passage, and that is, and that I call a diminished position, because you have this kind of diminished tetrachord here. You have a half step, whole step, half step, and things like that. So I really explored all the possibilities and created many exercises in order for you to master the thumb position regardless of the configuration. So you should be very comfortable with all those shapes, and that opens up a lot as far as finger option for melodic minor scales and modes on thumb position and things of that nature. The other thing I explore a lot is the technique of the fan, and that's the opening, and I learned that from Francois, and that's pretty much that you open and go to a new position, but the thumb stays stationary, something like this. Okay, and it's very useful if you have to, let's say, to play a kind of a chromatic lick, something like. Okay, for this kind of passages, it's very useful technique. It gives you security. It's like you're holding to something and you're reaching, but you still have that security, and you come back. Of course, it's a technique that you're going to use sparingly. You're not going to play everything like this, but it coexists with a more traditional technique. I love it, and I use for many things, from arpeggione to, of course, Bach and Bottesini. Many passages I do that. It's something that many bass players, they do naturally without thinking too much. Of course, you have the crab technique that popularized by Francois Rabat, and I think is a lovely addition to our technical repertoire, and it gives you lots of connection between positions. That's pretty much anticipation technique, and I think you're going to have some colleagues of mine, perhaps Hans Sturm is going to talk about that. So I'm gonna leave that to him to discuss. It's a great technique that I use quite a lot of anticipation, and maybe the only thing different I do about that is that I use that technique a lot on lower registers too. If I'm gonna play, let's say A, F sharp, G, E. So I use that kind of crab technique, anticipation, to lower register also, and that opens up many possibilities to play legato. I will do a parenthesis here. I've been thinking a lot about the Bottesini approach when we said, oh, Bottesini used a low old technique, right? That on low register he played half steps and whole steps with 1/4. I think that's great. I think that's perhaps very advanced. Because if you think about it, if you have like, let me create something here. If you have a passage that is C sharp, B, C natural, but you're going to E flat, something like that. If you use the old Bottesini technique, you will do this. You see what I'm doing? I'm anticipating. So I think this Bottesini is something that we overlooked. This we call the old technique, but I think is a very resourceful technique to connect positions. Let's say if I want to connect a position, right? I think is a very useful technique. So something to the new generation to explore. I'm too old for that. Okay, I think that's all I have to discuss. I hope I shared some valuable information. I hope you had fun. I always have fun sharing my ideas. I'm always learning. I love watching other people discussing their approach to technique because we always learn from each other so much. So congratulations to ICB for putting this magnificent event together. And I hope to see you in person very soon. Okay, guys? Ciao, ciao.